In this lecture, I'm going to discuss game engines. What are they, why we use them, and then discuss the Unity game engine, which is the engine we'll be using throughout this course. Let's start by talking about what features all game engines need from a software functionality perspective. All games need the ability to load and display visual assets, load and play back sound effects, receive player input, maybe it's keyboard and mouse, maybe it's a controller, maybe it's a camera and microphone. All games need some sort of game logic, which is essentially the mechanics or rules of the game translated into code. And of course, all games need the unique game assets. These are the visuals and sounds and so forth that make the game look and sound unique. So how do we build this? One technique is to build everything from scratch. That starts with building all the core game functionality, all those core software systems. So for example, we have a JPEG image that we want to display. We would have to write code to load that image into memory, decompress it, and then render it to the screen. We would have to do the same thing for audio, player input, and all those things we just talked about. Once we get all that done, then we could actually focus on the game that we want to build. Those game-specific features, the game logic, the game assets that makes our game unique. Building everything from scratch certainly used to be the norm back in the early days of game development. Today, this approach is no longer the norm. Today, it's only done in rare cases. The second option is to use a game engine. So let's talk a little bit about what a game engine is. Game engines really provide that core game functionality that we talked about. So the graphics rendering, the support for different graphics file formats, the playback of audio, reading player input, physics simulations, etc., etc. All those things that you use in most games would typically be built into a game engine. And then when you're creating your game, you're building on top of that engine. This is very similar to the concept of an automobile, where an auto manufacturer creates an engine and then they build multiple different types of cars that use that same engine. So what the game engine allows us to do is it allows us to focus on the unique elements of our game without having to worry about this core game functionality that really transcends many, many games. This represents the technology stack that a game typically runs on. The game engine really sits between the game platform, that is the hardware and operating system, and our game-specific code. So the game engine is your game interface to the operating system and hardware. And in fact, often a game engine is designed so that your game-specific content can move easily from one game platform to another. So the engine will allow you to move quickly from, let's say, Windows to Macintosh, from iOS to Android, and even perhaps from a PC to a game console. So one thing that typically comes along with a game engine is a game editor. These are tools that make assembling the game more intuitive and more visual, so we don't have to do everything at the code level. It also allows us to integrate game designers and artists and others into the game development process more easily. Most engines have some sort of editor. Here are some of the most popular game engines today and their respective editors. We'll be talking about Unity in detail in this course. It is both a game engine and a game editor. So what is Unity? Unity is one of the most common game engines and game editors used in the game industry, in education, and by hobbyist game makers today. It is the engine we'll be using throughout this course. So why is Unity so popular, and why did we pick it for this course? One of the things I really like about Unity is it's not game genre specific. What I mean by this is that you're not locked into making a certain type of game. You don't have to make just role-playing games or just 2D platformer games. You could make 2D games, you could make 3D games, you could make games of all different types of mechanics and all different types of genres. It's a very feature-rich game engine. It has very good graphics rendering, lighting, physics, particle systems, a sound engine, and so on. All those features that you want to have in your game, but you don't want to have to write from scratch yourself. And once you learn to use those features on one game project, you can quickly move to a new game title and leverage the knowledge that you've built. Unity is fairly easy to learn from a getting started point of view, but it has deep features. So you can get up to speed quickly, but it has enough depth to grow with you. Unity has a really great asset pipeline. Basically, the pipeline is how you get your graphic assets, your sound assets, and so forth into the engine. Unity makes that very painless in most cases. We'll talk more about this later. Unity also comes with great documentation. This is very important when you're learning something new. There's also a great community surrounding the engine, posting questions and answers on the web, and that makes things really handy when you do run into a problem or you're exploring a new feature. Just a few more things. Unity supports iterative game development. Iterative development is one of the primary ways that we make games, or at least good games, today. For example, with Unity, you don't have a long compile time to get your game up and ready to test. We'll talk more about iterative development throughout this course. It's a relatively efficient engine, so you can make high-performance games with fast frame rates. And you can also build your game to many different platforms. Like I said, the game engine often is the bridge to various game platforms. Unity supports building games to Mac, Windows, Linux, WebGL, iOS, Android, and many of the modern game consoles. Further, it supports things like virtual reality and AR headsets. So the knowledge that you build in Unity can be applied to various game platforms. And of course, the game that you build could be moved from one platform to another, in most cases with minimal redevelopment or minimal changes along the way, which is a big win. It's a relatively inexpensive engine. There's a free version of Unity that we'll be using throughout this course that's available to students and hobbyists and indie developers. There's also a professional version of Unity that does have a cost, but it's still relatively inexpensive to use compared to some other engines. Since Unity is so pervasive today, employers are seeking people with Unity skills. So the skills that you learn throughout this course applies directly to jobs that you might be seeking, which is great. So it's not just a toy. It's not just a learning tool. It's actually a tool that you can use commercially. The other nice thing is that if you do end up using a different engine down the road, the techniques that you learn in Unity apply to those other engines. Of course, there are other tools that you'll need along the way when developing a game. Unity, like most game engines and editors, does not do everything. You'll use other tools to support Unity. So for example, you'll need a script editor for editing your code. Unity comes with Microsoft's Visual Studio for script editing, but you could really use any script editor that you want. Further, Unity doesn't have an image editor. You'll use other tools like Photoshop and Illustrator and so forth to create 2D visuals, and 3D tools like Maya, 3ds Max, or Blender to create 3D content, and then bring them into Unity for use in your game. The same is true related to the use of sound editors to create sound effects and music. We'll talk more about these types of tools later in the course.